Oh. Okay, well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Committee of the Whole meeting of the Surrey Town Council, and it's April the 9th, 2024 at 9 a.m. in Council Chambers. So we first off need the approval of the agenda and any late items. No, thank you. Okay, could we have a motion? Thank you. Councillor Foderica, Councillor King, all in favor. Thank you. And the adoption of the Committee of the Whole minutes on March the 12th. We have a motion for that, please. Councillor Bennett, Councillor Chong, all in favor. Thank you. And first off, we have a presentation from the Okanagan Regional Library. And we have the CEO, Danielle Hubbard, who's going to speak, and our community librarian, Georgia Goebel. Not Goebel anymore, she's Braille. I knew, you know what, Georgia, I'm sorry. I know. They all went through school. Have you got 9 brothers and sisters?
There's 9 of us all together.
Yes, that's what I thought. So all of the Goebels went through school here, so. So welcome, Georgia. Go ahead, Danielle. Thank you for coming.
Okay, first I'm supposed to press the magical button. There we go. Step number 1, please. We're off to a good start. Okay, thank you so much, Mayor and Council, for having us on your agenda this morning. I got a bit of a rundown from Councillor Bennett of some of the many issues weighing on you right now, so I really appreciate you taking the time to meet with us. So as you mentioned, I'm the CEO of the Okanagan Regional Library. I'm relatively new, though not incredibly new. I've been in the role 1.5 years now. So one of my goals for this spring is to get out and visit all of the communities where the ORL provides library service. And that's partly for information. I don't presume that councils really know the structure of the library or the services that we offer. And it's also by way of introduction because I'm relatively new in my role. So my goal moving forward is to come out and see councils every year or two to keep the relationship alive. So this is kind of a first go at meeting everyone and telling you who we are and what we are. So moving forward, trying to orient myself to where to look, but I guess either way is fine. So one of the initiatives that we've pursued at the ORL since I started as CEO is doing a new strategic plan. And the reason for that is that our last strategic plan expired before COVID, which is a common phenomenon across the world, that post-COVID we're kind of rebuilding ourselves and reminding ourselves who we are and what we want to do. The other reason I think a strategic plan is valuable for a public library system is that so many people have a very strong impression of what they think a public library is. A lot of that is accurate and is not completely accurate. So I think there's a very strong impression of books, quiet, maybe a few story times and book clubs. And that's about where the public impression of library service generally ends. So this is a little taster that there's a lot more going on at the ORL too. So we are a vital community space for learning, connecting, and exploring. And when Georgia speaks after me, I think she'll really bring that alive, probably more than I will in my slides, by talking about what's happening here in Osoyoos. So our goals as a system are to cultivate learning, literacy, creativity, and imagination. That really falls into that traditional library service rubric of books, materials, creative programming, all those good things that I think come to mind when you think of a public library. We also offer a welcoming, inclusive space to gather and connect. That's really, really important. To have a space where I like to say loitering is encouraged in public libraries. It's one of those few spaces that you can go into and spend time reading, spend time on your laptop, just spend time there with no expectation of buying anything or any kind of transaction. We also embrace local heritage and culture. So in just a moment, I'm going to show you a map of all the areas that the Okanagan Regional Library covers. We have 30 branches. So what local heritage and culture looks like at each of our branches is a bit different because we span such a large area. And we also develop and nurture community partnerships. So that this point and the local heritage point are really where the staff like Georgia are doing all the work. You know, they're the ones on the ground here in the communities, building those partnerships, connecting with the culture, with the heritage, with people in our area. And as an organization, we also strive for organizational excellence and service excellence. So this is a new goal that we put in our strategic plan this time around, because the world keeps on changing and our communities keep on growing. And so for myself and the rest of the administrative team, we got to make sure we're doing it all in a, effective way. And so to put it into perspective a bit, this is a map of the Okanagan Regional Library service area. We have discussions periodically about why exactly we're called the Okanagan Regional Library, because we actually serve 4 regional districts. Okanagan, Similkameen, and Central Okanagan, North Okanagan, and Columbia Shuswap. So in fact, many of our branches are not technically in the Okanagan, but here we are. We're one of the largest library systems in BC. I think we're the 5th largest. And we're in the top, we're about 20th or so in size across Canada. So we have about 300 staff, give or take, 30 branches, operating budget of about 23 million. And some of the benefits that I see that communities experience from being part of a regional library system is an efficiency of what we can provide. So across the system, we have just under 600,000 physical items. So that's books, a lot of books, of course, newspapers, magazines, DVDs, CDs. We have a new collection called Library of Things that support alternative forms of literacy. So there's like numeracy kits, financial literacy kits, birding backpack, things that you still borrow and check out, but aren't necessarily books, fall under that 600,000 number. And the system also provides approximately 144,650, it's a very precise number, of digital materials. So those are ebooks, e-audiobooks, academic resource guides, things that people can access with their library accounts from home or from abroad or wherever they are. And those are certainly a number of holdings that it would be very difficult for any one of our communities, even Kelowna, our largest community, to afford a collection of that size on their own. So one of the other efficiencies that we provide as a regional system is centralized service. So this is a picture of our headquarters in the suburbs of Kelowna. So this is where I work. This is where the rest of the administrative team works, like our finance department, our HR department, all the kind of behind the scenes bureaucracy of a large organization. And this is also where our collections come in and get managed and distributed out to the system. So we purchase materials, we receive them here in Kelowna, and here being the picture, not here, of course. And then what we call allocate them out to the system. So we have a team of staff who start at 7:30 in the morning, pack material up into boxes, send it out to whichever branch folks have material on hold. So you can borrow books from any of the branches and pick them up at any of the branches. And that's all managed centrally in Kelowna. Next slide. So how this all fits together is we operate under a system which we call our financial allocation model. So as you're probably aware, each of our member municipalities supports the library through a tax levy, and that levy is calculated based on population and land value. And that's dictated in the Public Library Act, so the provincial legislation that runs public libraries in this province. So myself and my CFO, we take all that revenue in, and then Jeremy, my CFO, keeps a large meticulous spreadsheet where he also tracks our expenditures for each community. So the goal there is that each of our 30 communities receives a level of service commensurate with how much they're contributing tax-wise. And the good news for Soyuz is that when Jeremy and I did our most recent evaluation of our financial management, we discovered there's a bit of room to provide some extra good stuff for Soyuz. So Georgia and I are going to go back to the branch after this and see what would best enhance the branch. So that's, I think, a really positive feature of being part of a regional system is that efficiency of how far the resources can go. But to make it all actually come alive, I'm going to pass the microphone over to Georgia and she'll tell you what's happening here in Esquires.
Hey, everyone. Okay, so we have quite a few things that we do over the year. So one of our most important things for adults is our healthy living programs. With these, we try to bring awareness to local businesses. We've had Overflow come do talks and massage therapists, Reiki. We've done the whole gamut. Tomorrow we have ESS in to do a talk. So if you guys want to know what to do in an emergency, come see us. It's at 10 o'clock in the morning. All right. We've been attracting young adults with our quarterly boxes. They're called bookmark boxes. We get their interest. We put 3 books in each box and little treats that are tailored to their interests, and those have been going very well. We've had like 16 kids, which as a young adult, that's a really good number. It's really hard to get them in the library. Our library is not quiet. We have classes in almost daily. We have from the elementary school, excuse me, and the preschools, the OCS childcare. They're all coming and visiting us. We have summer reading club. We have 110 kids registered in our Lego club. So that's every Tuesday from 2:30 to 8:30. So again, not a quiet time to be at the library. I just have to think of what else we've done. We've done scavenger hunts. We've got, we just did a very popular and successful plant and seed exchange on Saturday. And we threw in a book sale with that also, just for fun. And we have Scrabble Club coming up. We have movie night for teens coming up. We have, there's so many things that we're doing. Summer reading club. Summer reading club is very popular, and we do that the whole summer. The month of July, we have performers in, and then in August, we do take and makes and projects that they bring back, and that's always full. And yeah, I can't think of anything else at the moment. Come in and see.
Well, thank you very much, Georgia and Danielle. It's amazing. I just want to point out that the library, before it moved to the Sonora Center, was right next door in the planning department. That used to be the Okanagan Regional Library for many years. It's been there. Did you work in there?
I worked in there.
And where it is now. It's in a really good central location right now. I think at the Sonora, obviously, you've got lots of people that come in all the time, the kids from the school next door, and everybody can walk. So thank you very much. One thing that you didn't mention was Friends of the Library. And I know you collect all of the books for that, and if you've seen them, we have them next door in the old, there must be 100 boxes in there ready for the sale this summer. Yeah, it's amazing. So thank you, both of you, for everything that you do, because we pay library on taxes, and therefore, we should use it. And I always think when I go in, how do I do this again? Because don't go in often, and I should go in more. So thank you very much. I'll just see if anybody else has any questions or concerns. Go ahead, Councillor King.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Mayor. Just a question for your new public duty night. Is there an age group for that?
5 to whatever. We get little ones.
You need to stand up at the microphone, Georgia. Nobody will hear.
Sorry, there's really no age group for Lego Club. We can just start coming in anytime between 2:30 and 7:30. We get really littles with their parents come in, and we have other blocks besides Legos. We have Kiva planks, we have like the bigger blocks, and we also have magnetic blocks that are very popular. So, yeah.
Anybody else? Go ahead, Councillor Chong.
Thank you. In terms of communication, do you have any strategies to cast a wider net for more public engagement?
Yeah, that's a good question. So we, at headquarters, one of my direct reports is a director of marketing communications. The challenge with that role is that we only have one of them and we have 30 branches. And so I would say, although he does some of the communication work, for instance, if there's a large system-wide change, last year we eliminated charging late fines. So in that case, it would be the director of communications would put the word out to everyone. Definitely on the ground level, like what about expanding reach within the Soyuz? In reality, that often falls to Georgia and her like colleagues across the system. So if anyone has great ideas of how to reach out more effectively to the community, I would love to hear that, because that's something that we're always trying different ways. And I think that one of the challenges too is that throughout our system, and I know this is true in Osoyoos, the population is growing and people are moving in and out of the area too. So it's like this ongoing need to try to figure out how to reach people and let people know about the services we're offering. Certainly being located close to the elementary school is really, really helpful in Osoyoos, because of course, like a captive audience of eager learners. But then, yeah, reaching adult audiences can be more difficult because there's so many different ways people learn about what's happening. Sorry, that wasn't a like really concrete answer, but.
Can I ask, how often does the truck come down to bring replenish supplies, come to us? Is it once a week?
Wednesdays and Fridays.
Oh, full 2 days. a week.
Yeah.
Wow,
Yeah.
that's pretty good service if you've got to go to 30 different branches. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so I know it's easy to, and you get notification when a book comes in for you and you can just run and pick it up. So, yeah, no, thank you very much. Anybody else? No? Well, thank you so much for coming. We appreciate it. And we certainly appreciate the Osoyoos branch and all the things they do for the town. So thank you both.
Thank you. We very much appreciate your support. So be in touch anytime.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, next we have zoning bylaw review, vehicle parking regulations, and we will ask our planner, Chris Garish, to come up. Thank you, Chris.
Let's wait for this slide presentation. Here. All right, thank you. So address only bylaw. Back again. Taking direction on a different section. To start slides though. So just some background, and again, I'm sure this isn't new to council, but just the context for the questions that I'm seeking direction on today. So of course, the preparation of the zoning bylaw has been going on since 2022, so we're years into it. There are two other components to the zoning bylaw review, which I won't be touching on for this particular presentation. And also just a reminder too, which will also be addressed in the second presentation, that council has provided previous direction on a number of different aspects in relation to the zoning bylaw already. Cannabis sales, home occupations, gas stations. The questions before you now in relation to parking regs are very similar. We've come to a different section of the bylaw now. Parking regs are fairly standard, don't change much over time, but there are a couple of items that we do require direction from council. Hence this report. So again, like everything in land use planning, almost all of our authority derives from the Local Government Act, and so there is a section 525 that gives council the ability to do what it has done in the past, probably over decades, in relation to regulation of parking within the town. It has statutory authority to mandate or require property owners and uses that they provide off-street parking. You have the ability to establish design guidelines for what those parking spaces must look like. The Act provides you the flexibility to allow property owners to provide those spaces on different parcels other than where the use is occurring. And I think the big question today, is the Act gives you the ability to accept payment of money in lieu of parking spaces that may not be able to be provided on a particular parcel. So again, I think a lot of what we're looking at putting in or not putting in, but carrying forward into the new zoning bylaw already exists within the town's current zoning bylaw. And so further to the statutory authority that you have, your current zoning bylaw already speaks to requiring off-street parking. It provides a reduction in the core area, which I'll touch on in a couple of slides here. It regulates how parking facilities are to be used. As per the act, it allows for parking in separate parcels, allows for payment to move. Sets out standards for what the bylaw currently calls disability parking. I'll touch on in the next slide. And then it also establishes design guidelines. And so design guidelines for parking, if you think about it, it's like stall width. How wide does it need to be in order to accommodate current vehicles? What kind of turning radiuses are needed? When you're exiting the width, if it's a 1 lane versus 2 lane, it gives you dimensions for that. So it's not, I mean, as far as zoning bylaw regs go, they're not terribly exciting, but important nonetheless. So as I've indicated, a lot of those are going forward unchanged into the new bylaw. You can see here the list of stuff that's proposed is almost identical. The one difference, of course, is that disability parking is now referred to as accessible parking spaces. And this is some of the standard tables, parking requirements that would be in the new zoning bylaw, but these are based on what's in the existing. So when we say that somebody has to provide parking on a site for a particular use, this is how the bylaw sets it out. So on one hand, you have the column, and I've used residential as an example here, and then the other column sets out how many spaces per dwelling unit, and then further to what I was just saying about the design standards, you can see here that the bylaw sets out the minimum dimensions based on the type of parking spaces being provided. So again, this is all just being presented for background context. So location of off-street parking spaces. So I'm not seeking direction from council on this per se, but I decided to put it in the slide presentation because it kind of segues into some of the other items that I'll be touching on where I do require direction. So the bylaw does allow for property owners in the C1 zone currently, and as is proposed in the draft bylaw, to put forward a proposal wherein they provide their parking spaces somewhere else within the C1 zone. The bylaw generally requires that that be within 200 meters of the parcel that is generating parking demand, and that in order to ensure that that other parcel is preserved for those parking spaces, the covenant provides rights of access and the ability for basically third parties to use it. So we are at the staff level proposing this to be carried forward unchanged. And this is an example of where that applies. So I've got a few of these maps that you see in subsequent slides here. So I've highlighted the C1 zone. So parcels within this area have that ability to provide parking elsewhere within the C1 zone, provided through the use. Now, is this one?
I'm not sure. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't.
Okay, well, I'll just mention.
Thank you.
Okay, so the other aspect of the bylaw, this is where we are requiring some direction, is that it provides, I've said exemptions here, but it's a little bit as exceptions as well. And so bylaw, apart from the C1 zone, it also establishes the core area. So that goes with that. And within the core area, this goes back to previous direction that saw in February, in which small scale implementation provinces, of course, encouraging local governments to reduce parking requirements for residential uses. We highlighted that the core area already reduces parking requirements in certain areas of the town. This council looked, willing to maybe extend that further. I recall the direction we received in February was to reduce the parking outside the core area from 1.75 for multifamily down to 1.5. So a small reduction, nothing major. The other exemption that applies or exception is that there's a reference to new construction values less than 250,000, not triggering the need for parking. I'll touch on that in a minute, but at this point, I'll just flag that we're proposing that not be carried forward into the new zoning bylaw. And so here you can see vis-a-vis the C1 zone where the core area is. So we now have two separate areas within the town where there's different parking requirements applied. I will qualify that though by saying the $250,000 exemption is universal. It's across all zones in the town. And again, just some background context. So as I understand the core areas, it's not uncommon. See it in other municipalities. It's generally applied to historic downtown areas that were developed prior to the developments of the 20th century. And that's generally a reflection of the fact that most of those downtown historic areas have buildings which, it's not the full parcel coverage. It's taking almost 180 to 100%. So there's very limited space for parking. So how do you accommodate that? local governments then, come up with this idea of defined area where they either reduce or eliminate parking reflection of that historic built environment. Also, there's a recognition that some of these areas have a lot of the services that people need, don't need a car to get to, retail, employment, entertainment, health, it's all within close walking distance. So theoretically, you don't need as many cars in that area. And then finally, these types of exemptions are used to encourage certain types of development, such as multifamily. So we're hopeful that by reducing parking requirements, you're gonna get more resident development in this defined area. And of course, that's not a surprise in historic downtown, because that's generally where you want to see the types of mixed use, higher density developments occurring. So, okay, so getting back to the direction I need from council. So the core area, how do we want to deal with this? There's three options that I put forward in the report. And sorry, I'm going a little out of sequence here to the report, but just in terms of putting the presentation together, it seems to be more logical. So let's questions before you. So yeah, so core area, three options. Either the map is removed or is revised. It's repealed its entirety, or the status quo is kept. No change to that slide. And so I raised this because obviously the map I think dates back to when the bylaw was adopted in 1998. A lot of land use changes occurred in the interim. It doesn't appear that the map itself has been amended. Council could give consideration to expanding it to reflect what appears to be new medium density development. Like I said, Loon Crescent, there's another street there, but you can see it in comparison to other locations within the core area. It's not that far different in terms of particularly going west or north. Some of those are actually further away from, if you want to take an arbitrary geographic center further down to the area. Next slide. So, so some considerations from council. There's a lot of build-up here, but I think staff recommendations, no change, status quo. In case there's a desire of council to see something different. So some considerations to keep in mind, recognizing that, the provision of parking is already a concern within communities, so reductions to that exacerbate that concern. Reducing parking requirements in the absence of a plan to provide alternate facilities could present challenges. While there's probably certainly merit in reviewing the core map, this is where a staff recommendation comes in. We feel it's maybe something to focus on later, particularly after we get through the zoning bylaw review and some of the provincial legislation. That said, though, we are recommending that the 250,000 exemption not be carried forward. Generally, I think our thinking on this is that parking requirements are based on use, the value of construction. So just because somebody's renovating a building, it could, because of the zone that applies in the area, it could be any number of uses that actually end up occupying the building. And so the value of the construction is a poor indicator of what parking demand of that use could be in the future. So it's a challenge. I see it as a challenging exemption to try to work with. And again, getting back to the concern that 8% is in the community around parking in general anyway, there may not be an exemption that's worthwhile keeping at this point, but I'll take action on that. Next slide. So transitioning into the next one, which I think is the big one for discussion today. So as I indicated in the earlier slide, the Act does give local government the ability to take cash in lieu payments for parking spaces that can't be provided on the parcel. And again, this is not uncommon. There's a chart up that shows how many local governments in the Southern Interior apply this criteria. From what I can understand, the town has similarly applied it since I'm assuming the bylaw was introduced in 1998, if not before, with previous zoning bylaws. The amount that's in the bylaw at the moment is $3,000. Don't believe that the bylaw has been in effect. Obviously, inflation has taken a toll on that, and honestly, the way real estate prices are now, generally the collection of these kind of funds are used to provide ultimate parking arrangements, which basically means just a lot, which I think I know from my time helping Oliver planning, they've basically done that. They've required them to use it as a parking lot. I would assume that would be the primary purpose of the funds collected for this, for the reserve. So as you can imagine, collecting $3,000 per space at a time, it's going to take a long time. Real estate values where they are now to be able to meaningfully provide alternate parking arrangements within the downtown area. So again, it's the C1 zone where the cash in lieu payment applies. Next slide. Yeah, so again, just some of the rationale, I might have touched on this in the previous slide, but obviously where a property owner, because of the nature of the building that's on the parcel, has no land available for parking, this is an ideal option for them. You know, arguably it enables them to use their land more efficiently. This can be for additional housing or commercial spaces. They don't have to be tied down with parking. They can provide cash and give it to the town, and the town that they start providing parking somewhere else. And then, of course, obviously it generates revenue for the town to use for those purposes. It's just making sure that that revenue generation reflects the actual costs to the town providing the ultimate service, right? Oh, next slide, sorry. Okay, so concerns are current rate, not reflective of what it would actually cost the town to provide this. Recognizing, however, that any increase is most likely going to be passed along either to tenants, customers, home buyers in the C1 zone. And also, I think, you know, to be cognizant of the fact that, and again, we see this from past experience, if this has been in place since 1998 and there's been no funds collected, that's a 25-year lag, and we still don't have enough funds to provide alternate parking. So just because council starts collecting the changes, the fee that is collecting, it doesn't mean in 2025 the council will provide alternate parking facilities. It's going to be a while before the reserves are built up. So there's a time lag. At which time you're basically increasing parking demands within an area that don't have the ability to provide safety and afford that ultimate facility. So just be cognizant of that. Slide. So this is the comparison, and I mean, I fully concede from the staff level, the recommendation is not based on market assessment, it's based more on an evaluation of what the local area are doing, and also recognizing that real estate values over the last 20 years have significantly increased. So you can see here, I didn't put associates on list, but the current $3,000 would certainly be on the lower end of the range of what local governments are proposing. But I want to clarify too that, and again, I know this more time with helping Oliver with their bylaws. So the dates in the brackets are the dates of the zoning bylaw. I can't confirm that that's the date that the fee was established. So I know for Oliver, the $8,000 was carried forward from the earlier bylaw, but it's just their current bylaw of 2017, which means that was the last year that it was looked at. But you can see that other local governments have recently been adopting bylaws with, you know, significant higher rates than what the town currently charges. So the options before you in relation to cash and lieu. So option one, which I think is the staff recommendation. So we'll revise the payment options to reflect actual costs. And so we're recommending a figure of $20,000. Other options, however, would be to repeal it altogether. We're not recommending from the staff level, or the status quo, which again is not recommended from the staff level. So big question for you, but I'm going to try to answer questions. Okay, so yeah, so here's the recommendation. If there is a desire to look at other options, however, I think we would recommend at this point that be supported by an actual proper assessment, market-based assessment of the town in terms of cost, but of course that requires time and resources as well. So just to keep that slide. So I'm trying to roll the slide up. I think what I was just trying to highlight here is the overlapping nature of different exemptions that the town has in relation to the core area, C1 zone, providing parking. So again, thinking about that market-based assessment that was desired by council, we can certainly provide that guidance on what would be the most appropriate location for all of these options that the lab allows for, whether it's parking on alternate parcels, cash and payments, reducing parking demands within certain areas, etc. There's a lot of overlap and whatnot. And then the final question, and again, I think this is just a reflection of the current age of the zoning bylaw, so it's silent. Electrical vehicle charging requirements. And I think this is becoming a very common aspect of almost all zoning bylaw reviews now. It's looking at what types of regulations that the local government introduce to ensure that new builds are being provided with this type of charging infrastructure for generally home buyers, but also for clients, either commercial or industrial uses. So again, probably not news to everybody, but you know, I think one of the biggest challenges in terms of uptake of electrical vehicles has been over the last few decades just the build out the charging infrastructure to make sure that they're viable and taking long distances, short distances, different communities that you don't really charge. And certainly having that ability to charge up quickly in your own house has been identified in some previous studies as one of the key components to EVs. So next slide. Options for council, a little simpler than some of the previous options, but either we introduce regulations that requires for the new build that type of infrastructure be put in, so that people don't have to retrofit, or council takes a hands-off approach, status quo. There's nothing in the big bylaw, market forces prevail, and it's really up to developers catering to their clients. And yeah, so these. I put this in here, I won't read it out, I won't spend too much time on it, because it's in your report, but these are the draft regulations that we put in. So basically, for residential, it's 100% parking spaces and medium density would be provided or required to provide EV charging. And for single detached duplexes or townhouses, that's one space for going provided that kind of charging infrastructure. Next slide deals with primarily non-residential. 20% for commercial spaces would have to have charging, 5% for industrial. So that's it. Yeah, happy to try to answer any questions.
Thanks, Chris. I had a couple. I'm going to jump in right away. I have a hybrid vehicle, so I have a charger, and I can just plug it into my house. I don't have to have anything special. I mean, it takes overnight, but I can do that right now. We do in Asturias have, it was DO that came up with this. We have more charging stations per 100,000 than anywhere else in Canada. Just so that you know, we did buy a property 1 block away. It had a house on it at one point, but we purchased it for parking, and actually we have at least 2 Tesla, I think, and they have all the parking things in there. My daughter lives in California, has an electric vehicle, and she has solar panels on her roof, which of course we would encourage anywhere, and she doesn't pay any electric bills. So the solar panels connected to this pays for that. One of the things I wanted to ask was, if I was to build a new house, I personally bought a lot and I wanted to put a house on it, does that require that I put in an EV station in my house for retail value or for selling, or not? Or is that up to, like, I wasn't sure whether that was included.
Well, so if these regulations, proposed regulations were built into the zoning bylaw, we were building a new single attached, it would require the EV infrastructure, but I don't think it would look, I don't know if you could go back to my first slide where I had that fellow plug-in. Yeah, I think this is more or less like what you would be looking at. And I think this example is drawn from a society that promotes EVs in BC, and it's in an apartment building. But that's the nature of the infrastructure. So it's the 220 volt outlet.
Sure.
That allows for the quick charge in a garage, where you don't have to have that adapter plug-in that takes overnight.
Yes, but if I was to build a new home and it was in the zoning bylaws, I would be required to put it in. Fair enough. And the other question that I had quickly is that the 20,000 that's recommended per in lieu. When I looked at all of the other groups that communities that have this, it seems high. And I'm wondering if it's a little too high, 20,000, just based on the other communities of roughly our size.
Well, so certainly it is high. But I think part of what influenced our thinking in making that recommendation is, and if you have to use your current bylaws, example, here we are potentially 26 years later, that was introduced at the time, it's never been reviewed.
Right.
So recognizing that there's a lag time between when these figures are put into a bylaw versus when it may actually get reviewed again, we're talking 5 to 10 years. I think we're building in a bit of a cushion to reflect that it might be a decade before it's looked at and revised again. So it keeps pace with increases in real estate and like on in the interim.
Good. Thank you. And one last thing, about 10 years ago, we did a sort of a map of the downtown area and looked at the number of parking places, including church parking lots, that type of thing. There were 1,200 spots. Now, I don't know how that's changed now, but there is a map somewhere that shows that, because it was about 10 years ago. Just pointing it out for, just because I had it written down in here. All right, so I know that we have other questions here. So Councillor Bennett, you were first. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Chris, the $20,000 when you refer to that, is that done by saying, okay, it's gonna cost $600,000 to buy a lot, it's gonna cost $2 million to build a 3-story building, we can get 50 cars in that building, therefore, to do that, to build a 3-story in 5 years is gonna be, costs $20,000? Or these numbers that are just kind of, well, we think we should do about that? Is there some time of, if somebody asks me why $20,000, what can I tell? What's the rationale behind it?
So my understanding is that, in introducing this into a zoning bylaw and setting that amount has to be paid, that related to that is a plan on how that reserve is going to be used, and whether it's for the provision of alternate parking facilities or if it's for the encouragement of alternative forms of transportation. Again, just because of the nature of the working relationship at the moment, I don't have access to the town's internal system yet, so I wasn't able to go digging to see like when this cash into payment was brought in, like what the company that what the plan was for how the funds were being used. Arguably, it's kind of moved because no funds have been collected. But yeah, you're right. I mean, there is an arbitrariness to this, and the fact that we are looking to see Canvas and other local governments in the Southern Interior to help determine our costs, and basically saying, okay, well, based on what we understand, how much the market has changed in the last 20-25 years, we are recommending $20,000 figure. And when those monies are collected, and I think you had recently that liquor control referral, wherein the calculation was done on the required parking that would be needed, they can't provide it on site, and I think the figure was quoted at 3,000. So change of use, business license, that's when would be collected, put into the reserve. Ideally, the town is looking at either buying land, similar to what Oliver did, potentially paving it, marking out spaces, using it in that way.
Thank you.
Mr. Chong, are you next?
Thank you. So if there's a change of use, let's say a new business wants to establish in the downtown core, and there's an assessment, and they need 5 more parking spaces. So in essence, they would need to then fork out $100,000.
There's always options, and so they would have, so certainly the cash in the payment would be one option. If it's within the C1 zone, which of course is where it should be, because that's the only option, have lots of cash in lieu. There's another provision that I was articulating earlier where they have the ability to negotiate with separate property owner to provide parking spaces on a separate parcel if it's within 200 meters, and it's covenant to protect them, right? So that would be an option where maybe they negotiate with that property owner cash arrangement with them as opposed to the town. The third option, which is always available to property owners, is to come in and seek a variance from council. But from the staff perspective, if you have cash in lieu payment policy, I think staff would recommend every single time against varying parking requests, because basically undermining the policy. A person could be, if they're granted a variance and they're not getting off, they're granted the ability to provide the use without providing parking or making payment cash in lieu or negotiating that parking space somewhere else within the downtown core area. So there's options, but
Kind of reflect on Councillor Bennett's point earlier on the 3,000. I believe there was a time when it was higher and it was reduced, or wasn't? So there was history about 10, I think it was around 10,000.
And it was reduced to 3. Yes, it was.
But I don't know if anything's collected on it, and I know we checked once before on it. Anyways, I think, the $3,000 figure doesn't, in today's values, doesn't cover the paving of a spot. Understanding the reality, I think, parkade costs are somewhere in that 40,000 plus figure per stall currently as an alternative. So I mean, 20,000, it's half that, not even factoring in the land value attached to it. I think 20,000. Obviously, understanding the and the lack of land available in the area, I think that $20,000 figure though does reflect, at least start putting in the right direction of where we need to go when we start looking down the road in terms of additional parking spaces that are required.
Counselor King?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Mayor. Yeah, I think we need a change for sure. It's been over 25 years. I do find 20,000 a little excessive. I'd like to maybe see that at 15. But the other question I have, you're just talking C1, but are we gonna expand it to the other? On that map, it shows like the next section also, or just C1? If you bring that map up again, you've kind of got the other core area. C1, then you have the purple one. Are we gonna include all the purple or just C1?
There's one, yeah, so this one here, so in putting together the PowerPoint and thinking about the parking regs we currently have, I mean, it certainly caught my attention that the core area map probably hasn't changed in 25 years. Yet development has kept a pace, and now you have new medium density areas that, to my eye, based on the current core area, you know, particularly where the blue shading is, might benefit from the same treatment as with other areas. And, you know, also we're looking at, you know, questions around the core area, parking requirements, cash and payments, provision of parking spaces and other areas, all based on this defined mapped area. And this hasn't been looked at in a quarter of a century. There's probably merit in doing it. It's just in the context of the current zoning bylaw review. I just think it's a little bit beyond the scope, and in order to keep that bylaw moving in a timely fashion, I just want to flag this for council's consideration. Maybe something I'll look at in the future, but maybe not in context of the current project.
So I don't know if you answered my question. So right now we're just dealing with C1, or we're gonna include the core area, not the blue, the purple.
So the quick answer would be we're not recommending any changes to the map, but we think it should be reviewed at some future point.
And what would be wrong with doing it, say now or in the short term, because it took 25 years for us to get to here. It might never happen, so to speak.
It's really just a resourcing issue, and because of provincial changes, we're just trying to make sure that we get those forward and get your draft zoning bylaw to you before the June 30th deadline.
Okay.
And if we start tacking on extra work like this, even though we think it's worthwhile, it's just going to slow us down. So that's why we're saying maybe revisit this at some future.
Any more questions? I think we already have collected the 3,000 on a few cases.
I believe we had our director's finance review, and no, we have not collected.
There's a restaurant in town we collected
Yeah,
here.
no, according to the director's finance, we got collected any funds.
Anyhow, I could support number one, but I'd like to see it lowered to 15,000 from the 20.
So the recommendation at the front of the report, is that what we're looking at?
Yes, I'd like to see it down to 15 from
The
20.
cash in lieu payment down to 15 from 3,000?
No, up from 3,000 to 15 instead of up to 20.
Yes, that's what I meant, sorry, the 20, move that down to 15.
Yes.
And the second part, that the electric vehicle charging infrastructure be required for new builds, are you okay with
Yeah.
that? So it's just the change of one thing. Did you, no?
Oh, I didn't.
Is there a seconder for that? No, there is not. So that does not apply. Is there anyone who would like to make a different recommendation? Councillor Chung.
Well, can I start with a question first?
Sure.
With current trends with electric vehicles and now kind of the rising prominence of hydrogen fuel cell automotives, I just feel like we would effectively need to change that bylaw if we mandate the underlying infrastructure for electric vehicle or EV charging. Is it possible to not make it mandatory? Like I'm just a little confused with that because it's under the assumption of assuming was by 2035, all vehicles in Canada have to be electric or not fuel. But we're seeing a huge surgence of hydrogen fuel cell vehicles, which means that if these buildings now have the underlying infrastructure and it's not utilized, it seems just like a waste. So is there a middle ground that would be found here?
Did you have something? Chris, did you have something could you suggest something? Are you okay with that?
Well, I don't know. I was just going to confirm that. I mean, certainly there's a risk in tying regulations to one particular technology, and particularly if it doesn't pan out with EVs or the car of choice 20, 30, 40 years from now, and yet every single potential residential dwelling has been fitted. So there is a risk to that, but short of the status quo where you allow just the market to determine that. I mean, in terms of middle ground. Right, because it's, especially, I'm sorry, I'm just thinking about the context of a dwelling unit, but if we really want to mandate one per single attached or one per townhouse, I'm not sure the middle ground would be there, sort of not.
Can't do that.
No, exactly.
Yeah, that might be, but quite frankly, it's gonna take a while, isn't it, to get this all in place and actually, it probably is worth putting it in, knowing that it's gonna take some time to actually have it in place. So I think I'm okay with leaving it, but I totally understand the concern that everybody's brought up about the costs of this and, yeah, putting it in. So, yeah, one other thing, I was looking for a 10-unit apartment building. Does that mean there needs to be 10 stations? Or in an apartment building, would that be, I mean, would it be more reasonable to say, well, you need 50% 5 stations rather than 10? Would that be a bit of a compromise? And is that possible?
That might be more possible than low density residential, but the way I read the multi-unit parking requirements for the EVs is that it gets back to how many are charging. So keeping in mind in your core area, the parking requirement is 1 per dwelling unit. Outside the core area for multi-family, it's 1.5. So if you're doing a 10-unit in the core area, that's 10 spaces, and this is saying all 10 have to have EV charging. If it's outside the core area, that's 15 parking spaces, and this is saying all 15 have to have.
Hard to know, isn't it? Go ahead, Councillor Bonrica.
Thank you. Just taking on to Councillor Johnson. There's a possibility, obviously, the technology does change in terms of charging stations and the charging units. I hate to press in a position where someone doesn't place the unit, let's say, that doesn't outdates what their vehicle at the time has, if they were purchasing a new vehicle, and let's say it's it's brand new, something's out. It's a possibility though that you would just require the pre-wiring in place in terms of not installing the actual unit, but there's a dedicated spot dedicated for the charging station, the wiring's there. It's just not attached to an actual charging unit. But the requirement is that one would be there, if they even needed to.
So ahead, Chris.
Yeah,
I just
so-
want to point out when my house was built, they had all of this stuff in there for a central vacuum cleaner. But when I bought it, I put in the central vac, so
Yeah.
I know that what you're talking about. Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, well, I mean, it reminds me of the discussions that come up occasionally around secondary suites and new builds, and how far do you go on mandating that each new house has a secondary suite to help with affordability. And I don't want to say some, but maybe local government has mandated they have to be there. But I think what we more commonly see is that they'll say that because of course it always comes down to the kitchen, right? So that the 220-volt outlet for this stove is dropped in to a part of the house to allow for the easy conversion to the suite. Looking at the regs here in the report, proposed regs, I would say probably something similar to be done. Whereas it says right now that they shall be provided with an electric vehicle charger or a dedicated energized electrical vehicle outlet. Maybe it's just simply that the wording says that the outlet has to be provided, and whether the actual charging infrastructure is installed or not, that's up to the property owner.
That would seem to make sense. Does that make sense, Councillor King?
Yeah, thank you, Member. I guess we're gonna have more high density in our C1, so if you built a tiny home, would they need this electrical outlet also moving forward?
Yes, so we get questions about tiny homes a lot, and arguably, a tiny home is just a home. And so the way the bylaw is written is that it's not a principal dwelling unit, which would be a single detached, and it's an accessory dwelling unit. And proposed regs are saying if it's the principal dwelling unit on this parcel, it have to be provided one. But if it's an accessory dwelling that they put some backyard behind the main house, it's saying.
Anything else? Counselor Chung?
Thank you. With regard with the 20,000, I struggle with that number mainly because we are, depending on the US, we are in recession. I mean, the economy is not doing well. And I think 20,000 will be, it will be inhibitory for new business development, frankly. I would like to see that drop down to 10,000 and then revisit it as economic conditions do improve. And then I would also like to see the language with the EV charging requirement change to just the outlet. So I guess I'll just make that motion.
Is there a second or a second? Thank you. Is there anyone else that would like to speak to this? Okay, well, did you get that motion?
Yes, we did.
Okay. Is that easy enough to do, Chris, or is that gonna take a whole ton more work? Okay, fair enough, I just don't want. Yeah, so all in favor? Against? Thank you.
Over 10. That's why I was against it. Lower.
All right, well, let's try it, and absolutely, we need to have this done by June 30th, so that means that, it's important to get going on it. And I'm assuming that in a year or two, we could have a look at this again if it was not, working. Okay, thank you very much. So we will now move on to the second. Okay, great, go ahead, thanks, Chris. This is find it in here. It's sort of the same. Great. This is the long one that Myers hasn't had time to read yet, but it's okay, there's lots of it in there. This is the proposed OCP amendments. So go ahead, please.
Sure. So with this presentation, this is kind of an amalgam of two presentations they gave to committee on February 13th. And I'll probably touch on some later slides, but at that time I committed to council that based on the direction provided in relation to those two discussions, that I would make the changes to the draft amendment bylaw and then bring it back for council consideration, and then if council's okay with it, then we'll proceed to the next steps. Issue the bylaw. So that's where we are with today's questions here in relation to this. So I'll just start again with some background context, just to explain how we got here. So obviously, as council is aware, the province made a number of legislative changes last fall, and I see it's continued on into the spring. This year, there was some announcements yesterday. But this is from Bill 44, and it's the densities and encouraging more small-scale multi-unit housing. There's some important timelines to that, which I believe council is aware of. Next slide. So what we're working on here today is the June 30th deadline, and the majority of the work is in relation to the zoning bylaw, but of course the OCP policies have to support those changes that we have to make to zoning. So that's what we're working on, but we have other things waiting on the line. End of December this year with the housing needs report has to be completed, and then end of next year for the OCPs and zoning to be updated. 20-year supply of pre-zoned land, municipality, that's a discussion for another day.
Chris, can I just interrupt and say yesterday we got something about Bill 16? Are you bringing that up? That seems to into disarray, thanks.
Yeah, I only read that yesterday.
Yeah, so did I.
Didn't hold on later.
We just.
No, but I suspect we'll probably be back, so I'm getting off topic here,
Yeah.
but from my really quick glance at it, the changes last fall closed off the density bonusing schemes that a lot of governments had. And from my very quick look yesterday, it looks like Bill 16 might be addressing that in terms of providing a different route to get that kind of density bonusing now. So we'll bring that forward.
Yeah, I got the letter too, and I sent it up to council right away, just so we've only had it for 24 hours, yeah.
Yeah, again, just I think these slides are just more background context explaining the direction of seeking from council, those key changes, so. So Bill 44 introduced the restricted zone, which applies almost to all the residential zones within the town. There's a restricted zone is one in which the local government only allows single family, duplex, secondary suites, accessory dwellings. Next slide. These are some examples I gave you back in February, just showing this is just a random selection from the zoning bylaw. So restricted zones within the current zoning bylaw are quite common, so we need to correct those now to reflect the new statutory requirements. Next one. So yeah, so by June 30th, must underline, italicized, bolded, we have to have zoning that allows for either 2 dwelling units or 3 and 4. Because the town is a growth area, has water and sewer servicing, we're primarily looking at 4 lots, for 4 units per lot across the whole of the town, unless there's a few parcels less than 200 square meters. Another requirement that came out of Bill 44 was ministerial direction. The minister provides guidance on anything. We have to pay attention to that when we make our changes to reflect Bill 44. And so that was the policy manual that came down December 7th, and it contained a raft of information, a lot of which we have drawn on, as you will recall, from February to provide direction on the proposed amendments to the town's residential zones. Next slide. The other important component which affects the OCP that was in the policy manual was the province's direction on development permits. So the province is quite clear, I feel, that conveying to local governments that DPs can be used to frustrate or otherwise impede the viability of small-scale multi-unit housing. So they haven't provided specific direction other than to strongly encourage local governments to consider how they're using DPs. And they flag a number of things that we should be mindful of to ensure that they aren't an impediment. So next slide. So that was one of the discussions that we had back in February, is that we went through the policy manual and compared that to the town's existing development permits, particularly the character ones. And yeah, there was a lot of challenging aspects to some of those DPs. And so we sought direction from council slide on those. Which, sorry, I'll possibly get to those in a bit, but before I get to that, sorry, next slide. Before I get to that, I'm just going to talk about the changes to the residential policies first, and then get to the changes to the development permits. So in February, we highlighted that the town's current OCP had what refers to as low to medium density residential designation. That was followed by a medium to high density designation. Next slide. So trying to get those 2 designations to work in relation to the changes in Bill 44 seemed to be a bit of a challenge. Because those 2 designations kind of bled over into each other in terms of they're not really being a true medium density designation. Your medium density designation is split between the low and the high. So accommodating what Bill 44 was now saying in terms of 4 units per hectare, having that be a range of housing types, or with single detached townhouses, 4-plex, etc., was very challenging. And also the density established in the low to medium basically doesn't work with density requiring Bill 44. So we flagged that. Next slide. And then of course the flip side of that is the high density zone wasn't really truly a high density, it was more what would be traditionally considered a medium density zone. And it speaks to allowing apartment buildings and townhouses, low to mid-rise, 4 stories. There's a question as to whether the height allowance could actually allow for 4 stories. So we flagged that as a concern too. Next slide. And then there was the CD zones, which were a bit of an oddity, especially in the context of some of the other designations that been approved as CD, which probably could fit better elsewhere within the OCP. So we flagged that for some consideration. Next slide. So the proposed amendments that we put forward were to redraft designations, replace the low to medium, just a traditional low density designation, have that clearly speak to the restricted zone requirements in Bill 44, and have that just clear, and then redraft the medium density zone to reflect that, and speaking to the 75 units per hectare, recognizing that it's probably not quote unquote a true high density zone within the town. Certainly some of the CD designations are close to high density, and I think what the council looking to achieve in the downtown core may be more close to high density zone, but it's of course covered by some downtown commercial designations, so that's already addressed. Next slide. And so in addition to the policies, we also flagged for council some map schedules to be changed. Which I've got some examples here. So with regard to map 1, which is your growth management boundary, we flagged that for whatever reason, Meadowlark neighborhood plan to be treated separately. And left open a question as to whether this is part of the growth management area or not. But given the level of residential density that the town supported there, to us, we see this clearly being part of the growth contained area. So next slide. We're proposing a change to map 1 to include Meadowlark, so there's no question about potential density or service into that area, but it is clearly in the urban containment area. Slide. So this is your current OCP map, and again, I apologize, I'm going through this really quickly. So I know there's a lot of information shown because of course we're looking at the whole town. But this shows the existing location of the low and medium versus the high and medium, or medium to high density residential designations. Next slide. Yeah, I apologize for the transition in colors. I know it makes it a little bit more difficult to pick up the changes that we've done here, but if you can see at the top, yellow is low density now. I think that pretty much applied almost without change to the low to medium density designation. Medium density designations changed. It's the more browny kind of color. We've incorporated some of the CD zone designations into that, and I think we've also scaled it back to really where the RM1 zone is. And again, that's a reflection of Bill 44 now allowing 3 to 4 units per parcel, apartment buildings, etc. Again, that's from a planner's perspective, it's very challenging. It raises the whole question of what's medium density. We're trying our best with this. So this is the proposed map, and then sorry, this slide here. I just want to flag. I think the main change that we've done here, and it's not that it's lost, but we have removed. I just want to go back one slide. One more. Yeah, so you can see here that area that I had circled in red, kind of at the southwest corner of the municipality. Currently, it's designated as preferred future residential growth, but it is crown land, environmentally sensitive. I think it's earmarked for potential inclusion within national parks. Recognizing that, skip ahead 2 slides. Whoops. So we've changed it back to environmental, but that's not to say that the policy direction requesting the province to consider releasing for residential development is lost. Rather than have it as a map designation, we're proposing that policy be text with a supporting map in the main body of the OCP, which I think I'll get to. So yeah, so this, and again, I know your attachments for this particular report were very long, but within the amendment bylaw, there's a new policy statement proposed that speaks to encouraging the province to consider releasing the same area for residential. So even though there's a change on your main map, that policy direction is not lost. I just want to highlight that for you. Next slide. Again, I wasn't sure what level of detail to go into here. I'm not boring some of this stuff, but like I know if you look at the draft OCP with the red lines in it, there's a big section of 3 or 4 pages where this table has been deleted. I don't want that to be a shock, and I don't want council to think of losing anything important here. If you go to the next slide. So we had to look at this table because, of course, it contains the references to low to medium density residential, which we're moving away from. And then next slide. So then it also contains a description, which is not really accurate per se anymore, because again, it's saying that we want multifamily, but as long as it's compatible with the existing neighborhood character, which the province has flagged is very problematic in terms of actually encouraging that development. So we needed to address column 2, and then column 3, for whatever reason, the decision was made to include specific references to zones within the OCP, but of course we have to consolidate these zones now to reflect Bill 44. So this all had to come out. And so when we start looking at it in the context of residential, then okay, well, what are you going to do with all the other land use designations? And so hopefully my next slide, and it's got some direction. So basically what we're doing is deleting table 5, but we're taking the information in table 5 and building it into each land use category. So again, I just wanted to flag for council in case you saw that when you go through the materials. Yes, there's a big table being proposed for deletion of policies are not being lost, they're just being transferred to other parts of the line. Okay. And yeah, I apologize. I know there's a lot of information in there, particularly in relation to residential policies. And it's hard to even gloss over it. Yeah, pick some of the important parts to highlight for you, but we're going to move on to the development permit section now. And again, I just have to try to put this into one slide, so just a reminder of council's previous resolution, so we did get direction in relation to the southeast Meadowlark and hillside DPs. And to remove those, council direction also was in relation to multifamily mixed use commercial. To look at revising those existing guidelines to make sure that there's nothing problematic in there vis-a-vis the minister's direction on small scale multi-unit housing, so we've done that. And then the other direction was map 20, which is the riparian joint ESDP map. And just some concerns that we needed to sort out in terms of like riparian areas being correctly designated as environmentally sensitive and vice versa. So that was council's resolution. We said we'd come back when we made the changes, we to look at them and consider. Next slide. So we've done that in relation to the form of character DPs. We first run through the guidelines was to identify the landscaping, water, energy consumption, and GHG emissions. Again, because they generally require landscape architect plans or energy efficiencies, which I think the province has indicated already dealt with through the step code, building permit process, and we did the DP, so we eliminated those. In looking at the DPs as well, we also decided to introduce a consistent categorization of the subcategories. Again, just for consistency across areas, so that required some tweaking of some of the wording with each of the DPs. But we feel that provides better clarity for staff and the public. And then also, and again, I apologize that this is overly administrative, but we noticed that, you know, an OCP is a policy document and guidelines are guidelines, not regulations. Yet within the guidelines for the DPs, we have specific application requirements. So that kind of becomes confusing. As a policy document, guidelines, are those application requirements mandatory or are they suggested? To provide clarity, we're proposing that those be deleted out of the DP areas and put into the land use procedures bylaw as our actual application requirements, so there's no misunderstanding around that. So that, again, that's some changes that we propose. So again, you know, thinking about the red line version of the bylaw, that's why there's probably some big chunks that should be completed. Slide. So in relation to the mapping, I know I had direction from council in relation to the riparian ESDP, but I wanted to flag too that when we were doing the drafting for changes to the text, and also keeping in line with changes to the residential policies, we felt that changes needed to be made to the map for multifamily. So if you look at the next slide. Yeah. So yes, there is a big change here. But again, that's a reflection of the fact that the low density residential areas now allow up to 3 or 4 units in the form of townhouses and multi-family apartment buildings. Provincial direction is that really DP shouldn't be applied to more than anything less than 6 units. And so in those low density areas, if we're not applying to less than 6 units and they can only have 3 to 4, there's really no point in designating as multifamily, which if you go back a slide, that's exactly what the current multifamily DP has done. There's a lot of low density residential designations in here, which with the changes proposed will never ever trigger multifamily DP. So going forward, that's why the footprint of the multifamily DP has been shrunk so much on this now. Next slide. So moving now into the environmentally sensitive or environmental DP. So there's the two and the direction. So next slide. Really, our focus here was on the mapping. So this is the current map, and I think I flagged. I mean, you can see Peanut Pond is not shown as a riparian area, it's shown as environmentally sensitive, and so that caught our attention as possibly this designation. So we went back and we reviewed some provincial mapping that we have in relation to watercourse areas. And so yeah, we made some corrections. So you can see here now, Peanut Pond is I would argue appropriately designated as a riparian DP, not environmentally sensitive. And then the next slide. So we also looked at the ESDP as well. And I want to flag for council that some changes have been made to the proposed designated areas, and a lot of that's around the golf course and the treatment ponds. I'll try to show that on this next slide. So I know it's hard to see here, but the aerial photo left shows with the kind of green hatching, if you can see it. That's the existing environmentally sensitive DP. So when we were looking at it in the context of the riparian areas and trying to figure out what was riparian versus what was upland sensitive, obviously this caught our attention. You can see here too that attempts were made to cut out the golf course, but it wasn't applied consistently. Consistently from what we can see, the lower fairways were for the most part removed, but the upper fairways A couple were removed, but the others were left in. And so what we attempted to do, which is the image at right, is apply a consistent approach to these where the golf course is entirely removed, the settling ponds are removed. And the focus of the SDP designation is actually undisturbed environmental lands. And again, I know that it's crown land, I know the other parcel is town land, town facility. I think there's exemptions around that, but for clarity's sake, that, you know, we're not designating the golf course with the greens and fairways as environmentally sensitive, because obviously they've been disturbed, landscaped for like everything, right? Like there's probably not too much actual value there. Really, the values that we want to try to preserve in the SDP are the undisturbed values on the remainder lands. And so that's what the map at right is showing. Now I'm kind of going into a little bit of a new area here. I didn't flag this at the area discussion of council, but in doing all that other work on the other DPs, the Foreshore and Lake DP caught our attention. So I want to seek direction from council on that today. So because I didn't talk about it last time, I'm just going to provide some quick background context here. So it does apply to Soyuz Lake, but not all of it. It only extends 30 meters out. The municipality actually goes further. The purpose, from what I can tell from the DP, is to protect the lake from private storage facilities, even though there's a lot of them in the lake, and that the DP itself, the statutory basis for it is not only protection of the environment, but also energy conservation, water conservation, and interestingly, greenhouse gas reductions. So it's trying to do a lot, which we've seen some of the DPs. So next slide. So again, just a visual reference. So you can see the dashed line is your municipal boundary out into the lake, and then you can see where the development permit area applies, which is the kind of orangey, shaded area. So it's not the full municipal area. Next slide. Okay, so what are we trying to achieve? Now, I've got a different slide that kind of is, I think, a little bit more positive than this one, but in looking at it, this one was very challenging, keeping in mind that the Foreshore DP applies to water. And yet we have guidelines currently that speak to retention of stormwater through green design. That usually happens on land. Inclusion of recycling and refuse facilities. Well, again, that usually happens on land. Incorporation of energy efficient design, and they've got reference to EV charging stations. Well, again, that happens on land. Sustainable construction methods, and it speaks to restoration of buildings as an example. That again happens on land. And then finally, it speaks to the inclusion of amenities such as bikes, lockers, showers, landscaped outdoor shared spaces, which again occurs on land. So that to me is a big flag in terms of what we're expecting of applicants and property owners in terms of achieving this DP, when I think it's not something that really is in relation to it. And also, if the DP applies to land, I think there's a question to our ability to apply these kind of conditions outside of the DP area. So anyway, but it's not all that. In the next slide. Okay, take that back. I'm not at great slides yet, but the other challenge too is that I think there's, well, from my perspective, there's a concern that the guidelines currently don't provide sufficient direction to property owners and how they can achieve what it is the town wants to see happen with the DP. So I think general statements on a development permit can lead to that. And so here are 3 examples where we're telling people that we want them when they're doing their dogs to minimize impacts on the natural state of Soyuz Lake whenever possible. Locate facilities in a manner that minimizes potential impacts on fish spawning and rearing habitats, but we're not telling them how that can be done. And then only use materials that are environmentally friendly for structures above water. Okay, well, I'm not sure what I was saying about structures below water and what is environmentally friendly. So, I mean, I get the intent, probably a good intention behind those statements, but again, it's not providing clarity or clear direction to property owners. So, next slide. Yeah, so I mean, it's not all bad. So the guidelines do actually provide specific direction, but again, I'm not quite sure if the DP area is the best location for this. And I said in my introductory dot point here that maybe the zoning bylaw is a better location. I said building bylaw with an asterisk, so I'm not sure if it's actually something you can put in the building bylaw. But the DP guidelines do actually have specific stuff that we can work with, where we're trying to avoid grounding or crop wash, and it actually gives us a very specific measurement that we all know we can measure on the plans and that the developer can, build to that requirement. Don't use certain types of foundations, don't use certain types of treated lumber, and use rubber tires. I mean, that's really a clear direction. But again, from a planning purpose perspective, to me, a lot of this stuff is really building permits requirements, but I don't believe we require them for docks or structures on the lake. So that's a challenge. Next slide. And then I also just want to flag too that in addition to the DP area, there's also the town's foreshore and the zoning bylaw, which arguably is probably doing a lot of the similar stuff. It extends to the full length of the municipal boundary. The objective is the same, which is to promote the sustainability of the lake. And it actually speaks in a regulatory framework, not guidelines, to uses, size, and location of docks and platforms. Yes, it doesn't get into the specifics of materials and construction we apply to them. But I'm not, again, from a planning department perspective, I'm not sure if that's a planning issue per se, so much as a building issue. But I think the huge challenges with stage. So,
Can I ask you a question? When you say regulates use, size, and location of docks, platforms, and power lifts, there's like 2 or 3 different regulations, right? When you go to try and put a dock in, you don't just come to town and say, I want to put a dock in. You gotta go to provincial government, you gotta go environment. So there's about 4 different sets of rules. Which rule is? Because then the person goes in and apply for a dock, and which rule overrides which rule. So are we putting something in here that we say you have to do this, and the provincial government says, oh no, because of this, now you have to do this. And somebody else comes on and says, now you have to do this. I'm just wondering if we're just putting regulations in that somebody else is just gonna go override.
yeah, well, it's certainly a concern. Especially when you have situations where the province is also regulating the same type of use, and of course, most docks occur out below the high water mark, which is up the crown land. Although under the common law, people have rights to certain foreshore use and activities, right? I think the other complicating factor here, I'm just trying to recall, I know Okanagan Lake is a specific use lake for the province, and I think the other lakes, Soyuz, Kentucky, or general use lakes. So if you were building a dock on Okanagan, you require provincial approval. I think in relation to the other lakes, the smaller lakes, you can build a dock, you can meet certain criteria without having to get provincial approval, but if you don't meet that criteria, then the province takes something to look at. Off the top of my head, I can't recall if they got to the level of detail of these materials and prohibiting tires, plastic rails, and stuff. In which sense the town's foreshore DP might be appropriate that way, but again, in this current form, there's challenges with it.
Some of the challenges are that outside of the town boundaries, area A and the OID have different rules and regulations, so it makes it more confusing for people in the town for sure.
Yeah, so but yeah, what I wanted to do with this slide is flag that we already have a zoning bylaw dedicated to the same issue. The DP, well, actually, go to the next slide. I mean, zoning sets out standards, and if you meet those standards, you can go ahead and do it. If you don't meet those standards, and that's when people come before council for variance request, right? The DP is very different. You can't even get approval to start unless you submit application requirements to the issue. That permit has to be supported in the case of a foreshore DP by environmental monitoring plan prepared by QEP. A site plan showing, again, for water DP, I'm not sure why we're asking for a site plan that shows features on the upland property. Then we need a landscaping plan for a water DP, right? So I mean, there's a lot of challenges with this. And again, just because of the other work that we were doing, particularly in relation to riparian DP, a lot of this seems equivalent. Riparian DP is 30 meters above land. Your foreshore DP is 30 meters into the lake. A lot of the guidelines for the foreshore are duplicating riparian. Other than where it speaks to the materials and construction of this for the docks. Yeah, so based on all of that and the fact that we already have an existing bylaw, So I need well, I'm seeking direction from council, and so for discussion purposes, the recommendation I put forward at this point is that portion of the Lake DP field. The emphasis to the extent that we can, it's either on a standalone portion of the bylaw, zoning bylaw, or as zoning bylaws rolled into the new zoning bylaw, that's where the focus on the construction allocation and number of docks, that's where that resides, not in the PDP. Oh, okay, sorry, not done yet. So this is a discussion that we just recently had in the regional district. And I think it's beneficial to the town. I'll try to go quick here, but we're proposing, because we're into the DP section of the OCP, that's a new subsection be added, basically an offense section. And so it would give the town the ability to ticket for DP non-compliance, whether that's, doing works without the DP being issued or doing works in contravention of the conditions within the DP. And that's also why there's a proposed amendment to MTI before you. So the offense section is built into the OCP that the MTI bylaw be amended to introduce a penalty to go with those potential infractions. Yeah, I mean, I think there's certainly a strong argument to be made for the benefits of ticketing. Again, recognizing that, I think historically up to this point, the town's probably, much like the regional district, it's not very small, the government's relied on performance securities to ensure that the conditions of the permit are complied with. Those kind of securities, at least from an administration monitoring perspective, I would argue can be burdensome, especially if you have a small planning department, which I think it's fair to say the town has a small planning department now. And, really with some of the properties that we're dealing with, where these are triggered, which is generally on the lakes, the costs of that security versus doing the works required to get it back, I think sometimes just become the cost of doing business, and it's orphaned or abandoned. And then the town staff are like babysitting these securities and having to return the person to do the work. Whereas if you have the option of a ticketing infraction in those types of situations, if somebody hasn't complied and you're left babysitting a security, now you have the ability to go out and potentially ticket to try to compel action to be taken in order to comply with and fulfill the requirements of the permit, make sure everything's done properly. So I see it as just more flexibility and a preferred option in terms of dealing with this. While we're on the security issue, again, just to make sure that we're not spending some time on small amounts, I think our preference would be to see a floor established. And if the work's required in relation to whether it's repairing, environmentally sensitive, or any other trigger, if it's less than $15,000, that it's not the administration costs and maintaining that, it's not worth it. So that we don't require security in those instances, and rather put our focus on larger, more complicated security requirements. So yeah, so $15,000, and then so next step. So depending on the direction from council today, I just want to flag again. I'm getting a little concerned about deadlines bill for report compliance. And we are still working on the zoning bylaw, but I don't want the OCP bylaw to get caught up, and arguably we need the OCP place first before zoning comes along. So depending on direction today, next steps would be to initiate the bylaw, undertake external agency referrals, do public notification, seek feedback, see what kind of responses we get, and then come back to council with that feedback at first reading and say, here's everything we heard, here's any possible changes that we may think need to be done or maybe not done to the bylaw, and then we consider first reading OCP amendments proceed while we continue to work on it. So
we have a shortage of time to get all that stuff. How long will this, public consultation, that type of thing, can we try and squeeze it in so that we can meet all these deadlines?
For an OCP amendment, I think it's usually 30 days.
Okay.
So if we can get direction today, then that would probably get us to the second May meeting for first reading. And then I think we're looking at trying to get the zone bylaw around that same time.
Okay.
Or shortly after, but just to keep things flexible and options open, have them proceed on their own separate tracks.
I totally agree. We need to, for sure. Is there, go ahead, Councilor John.
Oh, I'm just gonna move option one.
Oh, okay. Moved and seconded. Moved and seconded option. Yeah. option one, which is there, and it also includes, that the land use procedures amendment bylaw and municipal ticket information be brought forward for at a subsequent meeting. Yeah, okay, so, we will take a vote on this, all in favor of option one. Thank you, that's carried. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Garish. You always provide us with lots of information. And we certainly appreciate the fact that you understand everything. And Bill 16 has, we didn't mention it, but I'm just wondering, are you going to talk about that the next time or are we still too new on that?
You probably won't see anything from us until after June 30th. On Bill 16, just so we can get through the fall session changes.
I was just wondering if we had to do something before, because the inclusionary zoning and that kind of stuff, if we need to do something before June 30th, no?
I think my recommendation to council would be the same as with the cold area, the other parking map, that
Okay,
there's probably work that needs to be done, but we should probably focus on getting Bill 44 changes up and into the zone bylaw, and then we can come back and separate.
and I have one last question, I don't know who knows it, but, once we get the zoning bylaw changes and we send it to the province, I'm assuming we all have to do it, so everybody in the province has to then forward it. How long is it going to take for them to meet, look at it all and get back to us? It's gonna take forever, like 6 months, a year, do you think? I mean, there's an election this fall. That's pretty tough to, I mean, if it was just Vesuvius, that would be one thing, probably take 6 weeks anyway, but with everybody, yeah, okay, thanks. Okay, thank you very much. I believe that we have the meeting terminated. Councillor King, Councillor Chong, all in favor.